Hey guys, Thomas the Solar Genie here, aka Mustached, and welcome to my review of Knives Out. If you end up enjoying it, then consider joining my Patreon page. Any donations are desperately needed. So, this movie is a mystery type of movie where it is a whodunit, as this old man named, I think his name was like Throw Me, or I heard Throw Me, so that's what I'm going with. Is murdered in his room, or it's technically suicide, but what led to that suicide was like altered from like getting the wrong type of drugs, and that led him to like it was like what led to it kind of thing. Anyways, we see that some of this man's family members, uh, a woman named Linda, played by Jamie Lee Curtis. We have a man named Richard and another name named Wagger. And we also have Marda, or Martha, I think it's Martha. She's like their, I guess their butler, or, well, not their butler, but their caretaker, I should say. Um, so she's the one who finds the body and is called over to the mansion. Once arriving, we meet the characters as I mentioned, Linda, Richard, Elliot, and Wagner, and the police are trying to get a handle of the situation. So 1 week passes, and they're at this party, and Martha is talking to some other woman, this younger girl named Nana, or this other woman, older woman, I think it was. And we see this guy named Ranson leaving early, and we don't know what that's all about quite yet. So she talks about how Linda talks about how her dad used to be up on all these games and stuff, and this interview process starts to go on with this guy listening in from the back, and we see Richard also going up next, and Walt, the youngest son, also going up, giving their testimonies as to what happened. And for what it's worth, they all give pretty good. They start to slip up, and they all give pretty good motives as to why each of them could potentially be a killer. And they also do a pretty good job of having the actual person who did the killing have a pretty good out of why they wouldn't have done it, but then, of course, that all comes and flips on its head. So he's mentioning how they're talking to Walt, and he's talking about his son, who's like into the memes and stuff of like white nationalist or other politics or whatever. Um, we have, I believe her name was Joni, the daughter-in-law. Um, and we also see that Martha also left the party as well. We then meet Blanc. I think that's his name, Sir Blanc or Mr. Blanc or whatever, Detective Blanc, who was in the back, just sort of watching on, listening in. And he starts to move up, and he starts to get in, and that's when the characters start to spill certain details on each other. Richard spilling on Walt, and we get pretty heavy implications that, based on the evidence currently, it seems like the most suspicious of the three would have been Walt. So we get more of that. And again, we see Ranson leaving. Spoiler alert. Guess who the killer is? It's the guy who left. Ooh. But that, again, that does lead to, like, it couldn't have been him because he left, but then it shows what happened at the end. So Blanc leads in, Mr. Detective Blanc. He's talking in with Richard, getting more intel about, like, what happened. He presses on with other characters like Nana and all these other characters about Throw Me and what happened that night. So we see that Richard is like sneaking around, and that makes him look a little bit suspicious as well. trying to steal, like, the stamp thing. So the cops are, like, heading out. And what do you know, that the movie has a time to mention, one of the cops actually mentions Clue, the board game. I wonder what heavily inspired this movie. I wonder if it was Clue. Um, so anyways, Martha listens in on Blunk and she's about to head out, but then he stops her. Um, and he's asking all these questions, and it turns out that Martha has a real trouble with lying. If she does, she like vomits. Um, so she's having a flashback of what she did, how she handled the flashback, and how her interactions with Romy, because she was technically the last person to see him before he died. And Blanc was hired by an unknown assailant, and that keeps bugging Blanc throughout the movie. So, the cop goes over the timing of the 11:30, the 12:30, the 1, on all the noises and all the little nuances of like what happened that night. And it seems like that little bit is to like say like there was a short period of time of who was doing what. Um, so Blanc goes back to Martha, uh, and it has another flashback of her playing some board game with Throw Me. It's a different one. Um, so we hear him talking about to her how he's going to cut all of his children off from his inheritance because they have been living off of him for like ever. They haven't learned anything. Um, and we see that she gave him the wrong drug, or that's what it led us to believe, and she believed it at the time. So she calls the ambulance, and he cuts her off, and then we see the check-in with Joan, and he tells her what to do and mentions to yell, to say what she says. We see her kind of climb down. She faked her way as him back in the party and heads back in. So we cut back to the present as the family's like talking about politics, and later that night, she has a little moment. Martha does. So Walt has a little moment with Nana, and the family is heavily considering continuing to support Martha despite what has happened. So Blanc is outside, and he wants Martha to tag along, and they're heading back home. And it cuts back to her doing this before, because this is like her coming back, and she sees her own set of footprints, and she's trying to destroy her own evidence of like her trying to slip back in and her doing all of that stuff. So she does that to her own devices. So she tosses this unhinged fallen plank again to get rid of more of the evidence because she still felt responsible at this point. And what do you know it, Ransom comes on by. So the family all meets up and they argue some more about what's going on. And they all sort of lean into the son, who's like, oh, I heard this part about the will. And Walt burns Ransom after it's revealed that he's one of the 4 people not getting the money. They all still think that they're getting money, by the way. And the family yells some more. So Blanc finds the plank, and he finds the dry mud, so he's starting to put all that stuff together about like what Martha did. I'm assuming he saw the blood at that point, or he saw it at the very beginning, because that's what he says at the end of the movie. So Blanc says he wants to stay, as the will is read, And it turns out that everything, and I mean everything, including the house, goes to Martha. And everyone's shocked by this revelation. And they start to try to dogpile her about, like, oh, give us some money, oh. So she goes with Ranson, and he clears himself. He tries to clear himself to Martha, which is a part of his whole scheme in the first place. And he then notices Martha's quirk from beforehand. So they go to Blanc thinking that what's going on with the murder. And Martha's telling him the story about like what she went through and what she did. And he's trying to goat her into taking the responsibility. And Meg calls Martha, the young daughter, and she's trying to beg for the money back. And as it cuts back to Martha back at her place, the news has already caught on that this money has been transferred over, and she's getting all this attention now, because money makes attention move its head. So Blanc talks with Nana, trying to get her to talk for whatever reason. It probably cuts away and there's like an off-screen thing she probably says. That part's a little annoying, but whatever. So she finds Walt at the back of the house. And Walt mentions the illegal nature of Martha's mother coming in here from wherever she was from. And there's this message from this unknown source saying, I know what you did. So she goes back to Ranson. And Blanc checks a burning house. The house that they were in, the big old mansion, part of it was burned. And there's a meeting happening outside. Martha drives away. Blanc sees it. They go on to chase her. She goes on about who's like going to drive or whatever. And she goes to the location of where she was told to meet. And she gets the case. And she sees this housemaid named Fran who gets knocked out. She mentions something of a copy stash or something along those lines. Martha decides to call 911 and tries to keep her alive. So Blanc knows everything Martha did because, again, she's regaling everything to him. So everyone huddles back into the living room, and Martha is being hugged by Meg as she's making her way back in. And Martha is about to confess because she's so assured that she's the one who's committed this murder now. She starts to talk, but then Blanc cuts her off and claims it was a suicide because there was something about the rules about like how suicide works. In the middle of the movie, I forgot where this happens in the movie, but it was like, oh, if I forget the exact nuance of it. It was like if they committed suicide, like the money would go back or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, the point is like the dynamic shifted back to like, oh, they would want to confess to certain things but leave other certain things out. That was the point. And Nuna starts laughing a little bit there. So Blanc is stuck. He's still stuck at this point of why he was hired. And Ransom is pulled in. And he quickly deducts, as soon as Ransom comes in, that Ransom is the one that hired Blanc. Furthermore, that the father told Ransom everything about the will, and that's what led him to leave and then come back in to do all the things that he was going to do. He goes over all the steps, which is probably the best part of the movie, about like how all of these little details about like, oh, so that's why this thing happened and that's why this thing happened. Pretty good, pretty solid, pretty, like every piece feels like it fits. So Martha gets a call, lies about on purpose about like what happened to Fran. She says that she lived, and Ranson confesses out of like out of sort of vindictive, like, oh, so I killed her, so what? Like, sort of like, oh, no big deal sort of thing. And after the fact, she vomits. She manages to hold in her own vomit until he confesses to killing her. So she got Ranson to confess his own killing. So he goes on the attack for Martha, only to find out that the knife and all the weapons in the weapon rack are fake. And then they arrest him. So Linda burns the paper of like the deed or whatever. And Blanc says that Martha won by playing the game her way. And he also claims that he knew that what she did from the very beginning, and she looks down at her shoe to see the spot of blood. So the movie ends with all of the family looking up to her as she is at the top of the second floor outing, looking out at them and just drinking coffee. And that was Knives Out. A pretty solid mystery, I got to say. The movie actually fooled me, which is actually I think what a mystery should try to do. And yeah, there is a big obvious hint that my brother pointed out to me about like how when Ranson returned, how the dogs would bark at him and not no one else. And there was this mentioning of dogs earlier, or at the explanation of like what happened as well, so they connect the dots through that as well. But I fell for it. I fell for the mystery. I was actually the most leaning towards the youngest son doing it in, but again, that's the mark of to me, that is the mark of a good mystery, is they give you enough context and enough clues to figure it out, but they do enough also to potentially trick some people, and I love that about this movie. And I also love how they were able to explain everything in a nice, concise way that fills in any of the missing pieces that were left out on purpose, so that they can drag it in at the end there to the reveal of who the actual killer was. Beyond that, it was acted well enough, pretty solid, and definitely enjoyable. So yeah, another good outing for a movie this year. Who knew that doing something, but again, I would say it's probably based on Clue, it was successful. Like a good mystery is successful. I'm going to give this movie an 8 out of 10. Really enjoyable. If you haven't checked it out, consider doing so. This is the spoiler warning, of course, so I'll have that so you will know that this was a spoiler. I mean, it's too late for me to say all that stuff now, but you'll know. You'll know in the title. Anyways, if you enjoyed the review, then please consider joining in the link in the description. The first link will head you over to my Discord server, the other to my Patreon page. Any donations are desperately needed. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye!